Really a pleasure to be here, and would just like to thank you for the opportunity to come spend some time with you this morning to talk about innovation, generation change, innovation, diversity, and really thank you for the gracious welcome. I had a great dinner last night with some of the residents and faculty, and then had the opportunity to go around and have a little tour of the institution, which was very nice. So, thanks for that kind introduction, and really it's a pleasure. So you've had two previous Harriet Tubman speakers, both of whom I know well, Dr. Hayter and Dr. Frederick, and both of them may have spent a little bit of time talking about Harriet Tubman, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but I'm going to spend a little bit of time on it because I think it's such a powerful story. So we know these facts about Harriet Tubman. So she was born somewhere between 1820 and 1822. She died March 10th, 1913, born in Maryland, in Dorchester County, and died in Auburn, New York. Her original name was Araminta Harriet Ross. The Harriet was taken from her mother, and she came to be known as Harriet Tubman. Her first husband's last name was Tubman, and her nicknames were Menty, which is what she was called as a child and as a teenager. She was given the name Moses, of course, as a nod to Moses in the Bible leading the children out of slavery, because that is, of course, what she did. And she was given the name General Tubman in the sense because she was really quite a militaristic person, and that was meant to really represent her power in that way. She was one of 9 children and sustained as a result of an injury in her teen years where she was asked to hold another slave who was trying to run away. She refused to do so and in fact barred the door so that he could escape. And an overseer threw something at her head and she sustained a skull fracture and a major head injury that caused her seizures and headaches and pain for the rest of her life. So, it's interesting that she ultimately later in life ended up having some of her care provided at the MGH, which is an interesting fact that I learned while I was reviewing this. Much of what we all know, or certainly what I know, has come across from my parents talking about Harriet Tubman, who I've known about since I was a child. But I did do a little bit of research and found some interesting things like that fact, which I did know, which is that she received care at the MGH later in her life. So the story of course, how she came to be known as Moses is that she was married at 25, and you see there on the slide, this is a picture of her with her first husband. This, of course, is the stamp that we've all seen taken from this portrait, and of course this is the quotation that I believe all of us know: I freed 1,000 slaves, and I could have freed 1,000 more if only they knew they were slaves, which of course is a comment about introspection and about knowing one's situation and being able to manage within it. But nonetheless, she married John Tubman at about 25 years of age, and then a couple of years later, because the slaveholder family had some deaths and some debt, fearing that her family would be broken up, she escaped, and she went to Philadelphia in the winter, about 90 miles on foot. And then over the next 10 years, she made between 15 and 19 trips back to rescue others, family, friends, people that she didn't know. And when Philadelphia was deemed not far north enough, unsafe, she actually began to go to Ontario. So all the way into Canada, where she absolutely was safe. And then at some point later on, we're not really sure when, she actually relocated to New York because, having rescued her elderly parents and taken them all the way to Ontario, her mother couldn't manage the bitter cold of Canada. So she came back south to New York, and that is where she ultimately settled. So after the first 10 years or so, she actually was quite active in the Civil War, and interestingly enough, she worked as both a nurse and a spy, and was the first woman to lead an armed expedition in the war, which again is something that I was not aware of, freeing some 750 slaves from South Carolina. So I knew about the South Carolina slaves, did not know that she was the first woman to lead an armed expedition in the Civil War. And then after the end of the Civil War, she remarried, and she adopted a baby girl, and that was her only child. And she died in 1913 of pneumonia. So I put these pictures up. You know, this is the one that I think we're all really quite familiar with. This wanted dead or alive poster, I think, is instructive. The bounty on her head was $40,000. Now, this is $40,000 quite some time ago, so you can imagine in today's dollars, we're talking about millions. So she was inspiring enough, we'll just say, to have a bounty of this amount, and you know, for helping 300 slaves escape. But this is my personal favorite. So that's a picture of her on her land in North Carolina, in New York. She died in her 90s. And the reason I love this picture is because, you know, it really is instructive to me about how you just, you know, you can't damp down someone's spirit. I mean, she had a bounty on her head. She had a head injury from teenage years. She tromped on foot via the Underground Railroad more times than we know how to count, bringing countless, arguably thousands of people to freedom. And here she sits, serene, on her property, you know, an icon. And so when I talk to my children about Harriet Tubman, you know, and I did do, much as my parents talked to me about her, you know, my younger daughter, who is now 10, would say things like, well, you know, but wasn't she afraid? You know, wasn't she scared? You know, how did she keep going back? You know, she was free. And that really gives us an opportunity to discuss bravery and selflessness and determination and all those tremendous characteristics that we all hope to imbue our children with. So it is that I'm flattered and honored, if wholly inadequate, to give this morning's lecture named for Harriet Tubman. So thank you for the opportunity. So we're going to talk this morning about surgical workforce, generational change, innovation, and diversity. So I'm going to cover a couple of different topics. They all string together, and then hopefully we'll leave some time at the end for questions and comments. So let's start with some data from the AAMC. So enrollment at U.S. medical schools in 2012, based on AAMC projections, was that medical schools would increase numbers 30% by 2016. So expecting that in the next academic year there would be some over 21,000 medical students. And this is a 30% increase compared to the years 2002 and 2003. And interestingly, 58% of that growth is expected to occur in the 125 medical schools that we all know about and think about. Another 25% will occur in relatively recently accredited schools, those accredited since 2002. And then 17% was expected to come from schools that are currently in applicant or candidate status. So we're building more medical schools, we're turning out more medical students, but our GME positions are still inadequate. So you can put a lot of people through the pipeline, but if you don't have the mechanism to teach and train them to become actual physicians who can practice, then we haven't really addressed the problem. These next series of slides come from the AAMC, and I don't expect you to be able to read the fine print, and it's not important, but just know, for example, this is from the most recent data from the AAMC that are available, 2013. So this slide represents active physicians per 100,000 population. So the blue bars are the MDs, the green bars are the DOs, and this is every state arrayed here. So the arrow is pointing at West Virginia. So you don't need to read the fine print, just know that the arrow points to West Virginia. And this is Massachusetts with the most number of active physicians per 100,000 population. Mississippi here at the bottom with the least. The state median is 244 per 100,000. And here's West Virginia, really right at the mean in terms of number of active physicians per 100,000. So this is a percentage of active physicians who are female, taken from those same data. So again, here Massachusetts at the top, Utah at the bottom, West Virginia a bit below the mean. The state median is roughly 31% active physicians are female. West Virginia is a bit below the state mean. This is active physicians who are age 60 or older. So speaking to our aging physician population and who will be here to make sure the care is provided looking forward, New Mexico here at the top with the highest percentage of physicians who are over the age of 60. North Carolina at the bottom, state median 26.5%. And here you find West Virginia a bit above the mean with some 30% of their physicians over the age of 60. And then the final slide, physicians retained from undergraduate education. So again, if we're talking about workforce issues, The question is, how many individuals are you retaining or maintaining from those that you teach and train? So this is a slide which represents the physicians retained. California keeps the highest number of its medical school graduates. Of course, there are some schools, some states that have no medical schools, but New Hampshire here at the bottom retaining the least, about 10%. And West Virginia is a bit below the mean, here retaining something on the order of a third of the students who go to medical school here. State median, about 38%. So we know that we've got some variation by state in terms of inflow, pipeline, and active practicing physicians. So that was all physicians, though, of all specialties. So what do we know about surgery in particular? So this is a projection model highlighting the declining future supply by specialty. So this is a relative change in physician headcount taking surgery. And if you look at all surgical specialties, there's a projected change between 2010 and 2025, expected a decrease of about 13%. I don't know if we have any thoracic surgeons in the room, but they're expected to be down by a quarter. So you can see that essentially the entire house of surgery is going to be inadequate ultimately. I mean, our neurosurgeons are doing the best, but every specialty within surgery is expected to not have enough surgeons in terms of relative change. But what do we know about surgeons and the patients and whether or not they're properly allocated? So for these next couple of slides on surgical workforce maldistribution, I need to give credit to UNC and the F.A.C.S Center because they've done a lot of the really seminal work on workforce, particularly in surgery. So this map and the ones that will come for the next couple of slides represent the number of surgeons per 100,000 population. So it's not important that you be able to see every fine point, but the little boxes are counties. So the counties that are dark green are counties that have 40 or more surgeons per 100,000 population. Going through the paler shades of green to the white boxes, which are counties that have 0 surgeons. So there are no surgeons per 100,000 population. So these are data from 2006, and you can see there's this vast surgical desert in the middle of the country, as well as pockets in other places. And then there are areas that are one would argue overpopulated by surgeons. And what is the right number? It's hard to say. If you talk to people who write about this, they'll tell you need somewhere between 20, 25 or so surgeons per 100,000 population in order to provide good care. So you can argue that we've got some areas that are relatively overpopulated and some areas that are relatively underpopulated. And this is a map from 2006. So this is a map from 2009. And this is a map from 2011. So you could be forgiven for not seeing much difference because even though we know this is a problem, we still haven't been able to address the surgical workforce maldistribution problem. And I have some thoughts on ways that we might be able to do that, but we have not solved this problem. And this final map just shows you the percent change over the 3 previous maps that I showed you, where the dark green again represents a gain of 100% or more of the number of surgeons. And as you can see, there's not very many of those dark boxes, to the sort of pale green, which is no change, and the brown, the dark brown, these are counties that lost all of their surgeons over the time period that we discussed. So this is still an issue. So the maldistribution is an issue. So we don't have enough physicians where we need them to be, so we can build more medical schools, but then we aren't training them necessarily because we don't have a mechanism to fund it. And then when we get them out of training at the other end, they're not necessarily going to all the places that they maybe need to go, and we are projecting not having enough of them. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and show you a little bit of data about A.C.S. fellows, just to give a snapshot of what do the surgeons look like that are coming out right now. So let's have a little snapshot and see what they look like, because I think it's instructive, again, in terms of what our workforce is looking like, what is it changing to, and gives us a leap into the next series of slides. So in data from our initiate class about 2 years ago, interestingly, women made up about a quarter of the class. As you know, many medical schools are more than 50% women now. And if there was a study that came out of Albany a number of years ago that looked at program directors and surveyed them and said, what percentage of your top 10 candidates are female? And it is more than 50%, or at least it was in that particular paper, which I thought was interesting because, again, if you're recruiting the best and the brightest and you want surgery to be the place where we continue to recruit the best and the brightest, then we have to make sure that we're really quite egalitarian in all of those that we attract to the field. So you can see arrayed by race and gender there on the right. And this is representing the fact that we have the entire house of surgery represented at the college. But this is, again, interesting. So if you were to look back a generation ago, you would not have seen a 30-30-30 split in terms of practice pattern of new initiates. So what we found was that about a third, essentially, of initiates practiced in academic institutions, about a third were in private practice, and about a third were employed. And we know that those numbers continue to go up because if taken together, our academicians plus our employed, whether they're employed by a large multi-group practice, whether they're employed by the hospital, they're still employed. So essentially 2/3 of our surgeons are employed versus 1/3 in private practice. And that number is ever shrinking. So again, that's a real change in terms of practice pattern looking back over the last generation or so. Where do they practice? So a majority lived and worked in large urban or suburban areas, and you can see there the split. We have about 4% in our rural area, but their needs are really quite profound. And as you know, because you have Dr. Borgstrom here, we've really focused in the college on a bit about rural surgeons and what are their specific needs. But you can see here the distribution in terms of where they live and where they practice. 3 out of 4 lived in the U.S., so our international penetrance continues to grow because, again, as the world essentially becomes smaller and there's more of an opportunity to share knowledge and information, we are attracting more international members to what is still the American College of Surgeons, but certainly 25% came from other countries, and you can see here the distribution of other continents from which they came, and the distribution here within the U.S. geographically. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about generational change. So we've seen a little bit about our medical students, we've seen a little bit about our initiates, so let's talk about generational change. Let's talk about those that we're recruiting and those that are in the workforce and how they interact. So generations, a couple of definitions: a group of individuals born or living at about the same time, a group of generally contemporaneous individuals regarded as having common cultural or social characteristics and attitudes. So you can see here the split of generations: a silent generation born 1925 to 45, the baby boomers 46 to the early 60s, often thought as maybe 61, 62 perhaps, Generation X, which is my generation, from mid-60s to 81, and then Generation Y, the millennials, who are our students, our trainees, our fellows right now. And interestingly, longer lifespans and better health and longer career lengths mean that we have more generations living and working simultaneously than ever before. Because in any given institution, department, hospital, fill in the blank, you will have all 4 of these generations working together. And you can imagine that that can create some interesting conversations, and we're going to talk a little bit about what that might mean. So just 2 examples there to highlight what I'm talking about in terms of the way that things can change quite rapidly, and that there may be different worldviews depending on which generation you're from. Let's talk a bit about Encyclopedia Britannica. So how many Encyclopedia Britannica families do we have here? Okay, so some hands are going out. We were a World Book family. How many World Book families? Okay, so some World Book families. So, for those of you who don't even know what I'm talking about, and there's probably some of you in the room who do not, encyclopedias were what you used to go to get information before the internet. So, every family who thought that education was important and wanted to have to know what was going on in the world had a set of encyclopedias. So, my parents had one. The M was really fat because there was a lot in M. XYZ was really skinny because there wasn't a lot, and it was all lumped together. And so, that is what you did. You had an encyclopedia, and you read it, and that's how you learned things. And if you wrote reports for school, you would do your work at home from the encyclopedia. Then you would go to the library, go through the card catalog. Okay, Dewey Decimal System? Anybody know what I'm talking about? Okay. And then that's how you did your research, and that's how you did your schoolwork. So, of course, my children have no idea what an encyclopedia is. So we will go to my parents' house, and I'll literally point it out and be like, this is this thing, on the floor in my parents' attic. And they, of course, they have no idea what an encyclopedia is, and why would they? So, but to, for example, criticize someone who doesn't recognize that the encyclopedia was where you're supposed to get all of your knowledge because they're not getting it from that same source is a little bit short-sighted. It's just a different way of looking at things and different things to which they're exposed. So another example would be the timepiece, the watch, the cell phone. So, when timepieces were first developed, they were very expensive. They were passed down from generation to generation, very sentimental, heavy, big, valuable. And then, we moved to watches, so being able to wear them on your wrist, but really still quite expensive. And then, when you were able to not have very expensive Swiss watchmaking techniques, but be able to sort of make throwaway watches. Again, I'm a child of the 80s, so I'm the Swatch generation. So you would have, those pastel, multicolored, wristbands, and you would switch them to match your outfits. And so now, if you survey college students and ask them, how it is that they figure out what time it is, all of them will tell you that they look on their cell phone. Nobody wears watches. And it's funny because I actually wear a watch now, mainly because it's an iWatch. So my husband, gave me 3 or 4 watches that all were, lovely and delicate and fancy, and they all sat in a jewelry box, and I never wore any of them ever, because I looked at my cell phone too. And so now, actually, the reason I wear a watch is because I can get my texts and phone calls on it without having to dig my phone out of the bottom of my bag. But my point is that in a relatively short period of time, what was absolutely understood to be true has changed. That's really the principle of what I'm trying to say. So let's spend a little bit of time digging down into these generations, and you'll see, I hope, that this does in fact have something to do with diversity, because we're talking about different skill sets, different mindsets, different worldviews, and how all of this is important. So baby boomers, and again, someone's going to raise their hand and be like, well, that's not me. I don't actually fit into that mold, and I get it. But very smart people have written quite a lot about this generational thing, and there is something that you can glean from it that may be instructive. So baby boomers, generally speaking, parents were traditional married couples. Discipline was articulated as a critical home value. They generally started their first job with minimal debt and had a fairly linear career path. Your future was essentially assured with minimal, with hard work and education. There was a near guarantee of a subsequent rewards. If you paid your dues up front, you were going to get your payoff at the end. And the average age at first marriage there, which seems quite young to us, quite possibly by our standards. So they were described as loyal. They expected a long-term career, potentially at a single institution. And again, paying dues is respected. And they often respect authority by virtue of title. So if you're sitting in the chair, or you have that title, or you have that corner office, then you are deserving of the respect forthcoming by virtue of your position. And they're often offended when deference isn't forthcoming from a more junior colleague. And so you can perhaps already see what we're setting up here in terms of potential conflict. So self-sacrifice is described as virtuous, and they're often wistful for a previous era that was a bit more simple, a bit more clear, a bit more linear. So Generation X. So these individuals have divorced parents twice as commonly as those of the baby boomer generation. They often are seeking greater balance between work and family. They expect to work hard, but are more interested and more willing to talk about this balance that they're seeking. In fact, often both individuals, if they're partnered, are in the workforce, so there's a little bit less of the opportunity to have perhaps someone staying at home and managing that, so the other person manages the work, and there's that kind of distribution of labor. They expect multiple searches across their career span, and paying dues is not valued or as relevant as it was in a previous generation. And they question authority as an intellectual exercise. I mean, this is what I was taught in college. I mean, someone tells you to do something, you ask why. You write essays about why. You tear apart their theories and you articulate your own. And so as an intellectual exercise, you question authority. Self-sacrifice may have to be endured, but it is certainly not to be embraced, and not something that's valuable on its face. And they're a witness to downsizing associated with the poor economy, and suggest that loyalty isn't really very smart. So if you're loyal, you may end up holding the short straw at the end of the day. So there's really not this sense that loyalty on its face is a positive thing. They're often the sandwich generation, with aging parents and young children with responsibility for both. And we live in an unpredictable economy, and they've seen that through their young adult and mid-adult ages. And often for academic faculty, they describe a private practice workload without the private practice payoff, and often are already $100,000 in debt before they even get into the workforce. So with that amount of debt, it can disproportionately disenfranchise those who are already economically disadvantaged, and or may impact the way that they decide what they can afford to do. Because if you are already economically disadvantaged and you have some responsibility for family or parents or what have you, you may say to yourself, I cannot justify 10 years of training to go be the congenital cardiac heart surgeon that's going to require me 10 years before I can get a real job, because I simply can't afford it. I need to get into the workforce. And so that may also disenfranchise people who might consider surgery and cause them to look at something with a shorter training. They expect a career path of spirals and plateaus, and longer lifespan and a less guarantee of retirement money, so we don't even know if there's going to be such a thing as Medicare or Social Security by the time we retire, really can add anxiety from a financial standpoint. And women are still sometimes forced into this either-or trajectory of family and career, even though it's shifted forward. So what about Generation Y? So these are the millennials. So they're the children of the boomers. Self-esteem is described as having trumped rules and discipline, sometimes in the home values. Spanking is less favored, more coaching, more time out. They often start their first job with significant debt, and many go back to live with their parents for a year or two, maybe taking some swing time after college or what have you. And they really don't see that their future is assured even with hard work. They can invest, and they're just not sure that there's going to be anything at the end of the rainbow. So they often are described as wanting their rewards up front. So again, you can see where this is going to create some conflict, because you've got the junior people wanting their rewards up front and the senior people who've been living in this deferring mode. And that can really create some challenges. There you see the average age of first marriage continues to creep up. They're often described as ambitious or demanding or high maintenance. And again, I am not ascribing any value to this. These are just some of the things that you can glean from reading many of the authors who write about this. Generation Y questions authority as just a matter of course. It is just what they do. It's not even an intellectual exercise anymore. If you say, this is why we do it, this is the way we've always done it, or we've always done it that way, that's simply not a compelling reason and will carry zero water with them. There's a perception that companies or organizations should be loyal to them because they're bringing so much to the table, not the other way around, which is really sort of standing on its head, the conversation that we had before. And they're willing to work hard, but a job is often not the highest priority in life or on their schedule. So even in medicine, we are very different in many ways, but we're somehow, not just so far beyond what is written about us that we can't see some of this sneaking through even into medicine and surgery. And so they really are looking for balance. They're really trying to carve out time to do, whatever humanitarian outreach, spend time at home, whatever it is that they're trying to do with their time. And both men and women place highest emphasis on family and extracurricular activities. Perhaps not highest emphasis, but a high emphasis. So this has moved from being a gender issue to being a generational issue, because I have as many young men as young women who will walk up to me after talks to want to talk about work-life balance and how do you plan this and how do you strategize for that. So it's really moved away from being gendered and is really being much more a generational thing. So what do they want? They want higher starting salaries. So again, that immediate reward, smaller buyout for the senior partners, a more egalitarian or equal bonus structure, and a ratio of starting to final salaries is a smaller number. So I hope that you can see that the people in the middle are feeling like, they're a chapter in Who Moved My Cheese, right? Because they've been paying into the system all of this time, expecting to get their payout at the end, and then this whole new generation is coming in and wants all of this balance and flatness and so on and so forth. So there are going to be some people who absolutely were thrilled with the status quo in the beginning, and then you've got the new people who are changing the paradigm, and then there's going to be a big swath of people in the middle that aren't so satisfied with this because it's not working for them. So just a couple of last slides, or one last slide on this topic. So you don't have to read all of it, but I'm just going to highlight two examples. So this talks about generational diversity and cultural competency, and I'm just going to highlight two. So this one is job changing, and this one is feedback. All of these are sort of interesting, but the columns are the traditionalists, which is the same as the silent generation, the baby boomers, Generation Xers, and the millennials. So on job changing, the traditionalists say job changing carries a stigma. So remember, these are the people who really foresee their entire career, perhaps at a single institution. The baby boomers say job changing puts you behind. So they're thinking if you change jobs, you lose your status, and so they don't want to change jobs for that reason. Generation Xers, job changing is necessary. It is absolutely necessary if you're going to move forward. Millennials, job changing is just part of my routine. I mean, you just move from place to place, one institution to another, following what you think is better for you at that time. A little bit on feedback. So for the traditionalists, no news is good news. So if you're doing your thing, keeping your head down, nobody's talking to you, you're probably doing fine. Leave me alone and let me do what I'm doing. The baby boomers, feedback once a year with lots of documentation. So those are the people that want to come into your office every June 30th. They want you to have a dossier of all of their information. You sit down, you have an hour. It's very structured, lots of data, and then you don't talk to them again for another year. The Generation Xers, I'm sorry to interrupt, but how am I doing? Because again, these are the same people that learned in college that introspection is important and ask for feedback, and this is how you improve. And so they're coming to you saying, sorry to bug you, but can I get some feedback? Can you tell me how I'm doing so I can adjust? And then millennials, they want feedback whenever they want it at the push of a button. So they want instantaneous feedback. They do something wrong on their rotation, they do not want to hear about it, a month and a half later on some, piece of paper that you give them. They're wanting to hear about it right away, because this is a generation that is used to immediacy in everything, immediacy in communication, immediacy in feedback, and so it changes, again, the way in which we have to communicate in order to effectively interact with one another. So effective communication is critical for productive working relationships, and you will see that there's still quite a lot of this going on, and there's quite a lot that we can do about it. So the last section of the talk is about innovation, diversity, and collective intelligence. So we've already talked about all these different mindsets and views that we have together in the workplace. So let's talk about innovation and how we are our best institution or our best company. So if you see growth, innovation isn't your best friend, it's your only friend. And in order to be innovative, you have to have people at the table who aren't in lockstep think with you. Otherwise, you'll never have an innovative idea and you'll never have a new way to solve a problem. So what's the most innovative organization you can think of and why? So I'll just give you about 30 seconds to kind of think about what that might be, or maybe not 30 seconds because we don't have that long. You're surgeons, you can think fast. So who's the best? So if you ask the U.S. Patent Office, who's the best company? This is the list you get. IBM, Samsung, Canon, Sony, Panasonic, Microsoft, Toshiba. What do they all have in common? They're electronics. They make stuff. These are technologically advanced things, hardware, things that you're actually making. So it makes sense that the Patent Office, which puts a high priority on technological advances, is going to think that these are the best companies. What about if you ask Forbes, who's the best? Salesforce, Alexion, Amazon, Red Hat, Baidu, Intuitive. What do they all have in common? Money, exactly. They make the most money. Best looking P&L sheets. So if you're Forbes, your 10 best companies are totally different than the Patent Office, but they're the ones that make the most money. So if you ask Fast Company, and I'm going to kind of give it away because you guys might not know what Fast Company is. Fast Company is a magazine essentially about innovation. So they are a magazine that focuses on innovation and innovative companies. And so this is who Fast Company says is the best. Google, Bloomberg, Xiaomi, Dropbox, Netflix, Airbnb, Nike. Companies that keep reinventing themselves and doing something new and different. So the point of this slide is, depending on who you ask, you're going to get a completely different answer to your question. And if you ask the same people all the time, you're going to continue to get the same answers to those questions, which may or may not be actually the best answer and the best solution. So a bit from the business literature. So when you talk about innovation, you read about innovation. Innovative firms often have very little in common. They're not similar to each other at all. And in fact, competitors often innovate in opposite ways. So same problem, two companies look at it and they solve it in completely opposite ways. Money is seldom a barrier to innovation. It really is not that the companies with the most money are the most innovative. And incumbents, interestingly enough, are seldom the first movers. So if you're in the middle of the bell curve, you're quite happy in the middle of the bell curve. Everything is going quite well for you. You're sitting tight. You're surrounded by people who all agree that you're great. You're telling each other you're great. And you sit there and you stay there. Innovation comes from the edges of the bell curve. The people that are so far ahead on the front of the bell curve that they can afford to do something radical and different and it's not going to drop their stock, as it were, or the people at the back end of the bell curve who have nothing to lose. So they're willing to just take a crazy shot on goal and do something that's crazy because they have nothing to lose. They're already, hanging off the bell curve there. And so you find that innovation actually comes from those two ends and not from the people in the center who are resting on their laurels. And diversity within team ranks is key to success because, again, if everyone's in lockstep and thinking the same things, they're not going to consider what might be wildly crazy to most people, or they won't feel comfortable to articulate that and be taken seriously. So creativity is a #1 desirable attribute for leaders. So this is taken from the IBM Global CEO Study in 2013. So if you want to look at the business world and talk about what makes a good leader, it is innovation, creativity, and thinking outside the box. So a couple of these next slides are from a business professor at the University of Michigan who talks a lot about how it is that we are innovative and how do we bring that to the table. So has anyone heard of the DISC profile or the Myers-Briggs? So this is just another one of those kind of characteristic assessments where you figure out where you fall on whatever the scale is, and it helps you figure out how to play to your strengths and that sort of thing. So this is another one of those kinds of scales. And essentially this divides people into 4 categories. The collaborators who do things that last, build the relationships, interact with others. The creators, who are those like way out in front, kind of crazy off the wall people who are coming up with ideas that no one else even thinks of because they're so radical. The competitive people, who are like the do things now, highly competitive, really, draconian kind of Machiavelli folks. And then the control people do things right. So these are the ones that are tamped down, like making sure that everything is done with structure and process. And the point that is made is that you can't have a good team and you can't have innovation without all 4 of these groups of people. You may not need equal numbers of them, but you need them all, in those seats on the bus. And so it's described as the values people, the vision people, the goals people, and the process people, often starting here with vision. And then you need people to generate the values and get buy-in from the team, those who are going to hold tight to your goals. And then once these are established and you've beaten back the competition, then you've got the processes people to make sure that it's implemented in a cadence that is consistent and reliable. And this is the graph that's used, which I think is really kind of instructive. So these are the green people, those creative folks who come up with the idea. And then you fall here into the area where you've got your competitive people who are saying, do it now. They're pushing the envelope from a timing standpoint. They're going after the competition. They're getting everybody out of your way. And then you're on the upswing. This is when you bring in the yellow people. Those are the folks that bring your team along. They create the conversations. They bring the collaborators in. And you're on a lovely upswing. And then when everything is sort of doing well and you're continuing on the upswing, this is when you bring in the red folks who are the structure and the process and the engineering types who really tighten everything up and get process going. But at some point, this line doesn't really continue to go up. You're going to fall off that slope that's so favorable unless you bring back the green people to come up with something new. And in fact, the best companies have the green people, the creative, radical folks, working at the same time as the process people who are putting the structure and the infrastructure in place to maintain. Because what will happen is you'll fall off the bell curve and your relevance will be decreased and you'll never get back on the wagon. But what the best companies do is they have this cadence which happens all the time and they continue to grow. And this is just a schematic in terms of, in relative numbers, how many people you might need in your company to maintain this sort of positive trajectory. So you don't need a whole lot of the radical people, but you need some of them. You need more of the people who are going to be those Machiavellian, beat back the competition folks, moving you in a rapid sequence. You need more of these people to build the teams and be the collaborators. And you need a fair number of people to help keep the wheels turning on the train. But you need everyone. So the flip side of the coin, so if you're one of those yellow people, the collaborators, you can fall into groupthink. So if you surround yourself with all yellow people, you fall into this groupthink, irrational enthusiasm, everything is a great idea, and isolation from external pressures because you're so optimistic and so positive that you lose track of reality. If you're one of those green people, those visionary radicals at the front of the curve, you can fall victim to unrealistic vision, poor methodology, a lack of discipline because you're just going off whichever way your mind is leading you. If you're one of these competitive people, the Machiavellian ones down here in the blue, an overemphasis on competition, short-term focus, or an autocratic decision-making style. And then finally, if you're here at the end with the engineers or the structure people, you can fall into a very rigorous, there's a right way and a wrong way, and my way is the only way. And so you can see that any one of these groups or any one of these characteristics taken to its extreme can be really quite negative. But if you had all of these individuals with you on your team, you would keep each other honest. So shifting out of business a little bit and into the medical literature, let's talk about where diversity or diverse ideas have actually contributed to improvement in the medical literature. So several papers highlight increased creativity. Diverse teams are more creative than homogeneous ones, particularly when addressing complex problems. So if the problem is simple, you can solve it alone or solve it surrounded by people who all think exactly like you. But the more complex the problem, the more you need a diverse set of ideas and problem-solving techniques to get to the best solution. Diversity broadens the scope of inquiry, expands the range of research questions, some of which may have been neglected. There's references here. If anyone's interested, I can give you the complete references. Increases health equity. A diverse team of researchers will be more likely to ask and pursue the most appropriate questions in the most appropriate manner. Promotes and ensures fairness. In a society where historical constructs have framed workforce demographics, it's important that neither historical barriers nor emerging circumstances hamper the pursuit of research careers. And just to take one particular paper and delve down into it, I thought this was an interesting paper. A couple years now in JAMA Surgery, residential segregation and lung cancer mortality in the U.S. So very drilled down into just a very narrow band of research. So this particular paper from the CT literature, so overall lung cancer mortality rates higher for blacks than in whites, 59% versus 52% per 100,000 population. Nothing really all that surprising necessarily about that because we've seen it borne out across so many different specialties. Now, interestingly, they decided to look at residential segregation, so not just black versus white and not just socioeconomic status, but segregation itself. So each additional level of segregation, so they actually compartmentalized and measured the ratio of integration in all of these communities. Each additional level of segregation was associated with a 0.5% increase in lung cancer mortality for blacks, which was significant, and an associated decrease in mortality for white patients. So what that meant is the more segregated your society, the more likely you were to die of your lung cancer if you were black, the less likely you were to die of your lung cancer if you were white. So adjusted lung cancer mortality rates among blacks were 52% and 63% per 100,000 population in counties with the least amount of segregation and the highest level of segregation. So again, 52% to 63%, and that was significant. So in contrast, the adjusted lung cancer mortality rates for whites decreased with increasing levels of segregation. So their conclusion, lung cancer mortality higher in blacks than whites and highest in black patients living in the most segregated counties regardless of socioeconomic status. Now, there's 1,000 papers I could have pulled, but I pulled this one because I think it's just an interesting twist that you might argue might not have been looked at had there not been a diverse team looking at this particular question. And maybe segregation wouldn't have been thought of as something that was important in terms of lung cancer mortality, and you would be forgiven for not knowing that. So the AAMC definition of diversity, and I'm going to read it because I actually really like this definition. I think it's pretty comprehensive. Diversity is a core value, embodies inclusiveness, mutual respect, and multiple perspectives, and serves as a catalyst for change resulting in health equity. In this context, we're mindful of all aspects of human differences, such as socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, language, nationality, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, geography, disability, and age. And I would add what we just got through talking about in terms of innovation, which is, worldview, whatever you want to call that, whether it's, the Myers-Briggs or the DISC or the this, that all of it is diversity and brings these different perspectives. So diversity, I would submit to you, as a solution, not a problem, particularly if you are trying to be innovative and get to the best answer to a complex problem. So the capacity for innovation and advancement requires engaging individuals with these different worldviews. We've talked about this a bit already, different skill sets, different experiences, different problem-solving expertise, having gone through different challenges. And in the context of healthcare delivery, also brings to the table an additional capacity for empathy, ability to identify implicit expectations of privilege, and attentiveness to nuances of cultural impact or effective communication that might have been ignored or simply unrecognized by a more homogeneous team. So what does institutional progress look like, whether you're talking about a company, a department, an institution? The first pass at increasing diversity, and this notion, again, comes out of others who've written about it, the AAMC and others. The first pass is isolated efforts removing entrenched barriers to equality and access. But moving forward to the next step, the more progressive step, is diversity which can be perceived as a peripheral issue, often perceived in parallel with or sometimes even perceived to be in conflict with excellence. And then moving forward to really the most progressive and the most integrated and the most accurate perception about diversity, which is it is an integral core component required for excellence and innovation. It's not something to be done in spite of or grudgingly, but rather absolutely essential if you're going to be excellent and innovative. So the last couple of slides as I wrap up are on collective intelligence, which is just more of this bringing together of the diverse mindsets and how this is the only pathway to innovation and excellence. So collective intelligence is described as a phenomenon in which the interaction of small amounts of information provided by different individuals results in knowledge greater than the sum of the parts. The actions of different individuals lead to a collective phenomenon not explicitly sought by any of them. And the quotation that I like the most on this is local information leads to global wisdom. So again, this notion of bringing together all of the different perspectives and coming up at the end of the day with a solution that's better than what anyone would have come up with alone. And that leads into this notion of super additivity. So when a collection of diverse people work together and one person suggests an improvement, other team members can often build on that, further improve on that idea in a way that's kind of ping-pongs back and forth. And if you've ever convened a work group or a team to try to solve a complex problem, you'll see that if you put them in a room and leave them alone and let them come with the ideas quickly as opposed to censoring them and saying, well, this isn't doable or this isn't possible, so I'm going to censor that idea because it's too radical. If you throw it out on the table, what will happen is others will build on it, adapt it, mold it, and you'll ultimately come with this notion of super additivity. And again, some of the references are on the bottom, so anyone who's interested in actually reading these books, I'm happy to provide the reading list. So diverse perspectives and diverse heuristics, that sort of self-assessment, and self-introspection applied sequentially and in combination, requires respect for and valuation of differing viewpoints. So what this requires in order to get to that super additivity is that you not shut down the ideas that seem kind of wonky to you, acknowledging that they come from someone who's in a different perspective and it may still be part of the solution. And synergies naturally develop if facilitated and encouraged. So in conclusion, I've covered with you the impending surgeon shortage and some maldistribution. We've talked a bit about inadequate funding for GME, and that means that smart recruitment into surgery is absolutely critical. Young surgeons are a diverse group. They are not a monolith. Communication styles differ across generations, and that innovation and excellence, whatever your institution, department, company, what have you, requires diversity of all types on the teams we build if, in fact, we are to get to a successful and optimal outcome. So with that, thank you very much for your attention, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Everybody's asleep? Yeah. It's a great question, and I'm not aware that anyone has actually looked at that particular question in terms of having, for example, departments of surgery do the test, because there's a test that you take that maps you to one of those four things. I think it would be an interesting thing to do. I will tell you that in my division at the college, I did this. I made my whole team take it, and so we were a little bit off from that inverted triangle. We had a couple of green people. We had more yellow people. We had the most in that next category, the blue. We were sort of equally split between the blue and the red. So in that inverted triangle, there were more people in the red. We were kind of equally split between the blue and the red. But it was interesting to do for the division. And the reason I thought it was most interesting is that in addition to just doing it, we actually shared with each other what we were. And we did the same with the disc profile, acknowledging that no one scale system is perfect. We did the disc profile as well. So like on the disc thing, like on the DI, right? So not only did we do it for our own assessment, we shared it with each other. So that if I'm a DI and I'm talking to an SC, I know when they come into my office that we're going to be looking at things from totally different perspectives. So it becomes sort of an emotional intelligence conversation. So I have to manage my D-ness, knowing that I'm talking to a C, and be thoughtful about making sure that we get to the end game, because I know that they're not hearing me if I'm talking, entirely in my D mode. And the same for the color. So I think one of the things that I would suggest is that for some departments it may be really instructive to do it within your department and see how people interact. Surgeons by and large tend to be, I'm grossly generalizing, But if you just read or think about ourselves as we know it, we've got to be high on the red, because you've got to be attentive to the processes and make sure that every patient gets perfect care all the time. But we can all identify individuals who are that green person, who are coming up with these crazy, innovative, random ideas, and then ultimately that becomes part of the parlance. But it was radical when they first thought about it. We can pull up whatever you want to talk about, lap chole, I am rotting of femurs, the vac dressing, all of these things that got people laughed out of the scientific meetings when they first presented them, but have now become what we do all the time. So you've got to have some of those green people. Probably a little less of the yellow, team building in terms of the OR. But if you're going to move out of the operating room and into any other leadership role in your institution, in your apartment, in your hospital, you've got to be able to build the collaborative piece as well. And again, I think in the house of surgery, we've changed from that I'm master of my ship to I have to be able to interact with other people in the hospital, the C-suite, the nurses, the students or residents, to fill in the blank. So, good question. Interesting research question. So it's interesting you should say that. So my children are Generation Z. So I'm reading furiously because I have a 16-year-old, and you have to read furiously to figure out how to manage them under the best of circumstances. So if this can give me some insight, that's really helpful. So the thought with Generation Z is that they are probably going to swing back a little bit from the Generation Ys and be a little bit more. Let me. How do I say this? So they will maintain some pieces of Generation Y. So the pieces about wanting to make the world a better place, the pieces about really believing that they have an impact on the world, they want to literally make the world a better place, and they believe that they can have that impact. That is something that you do see preserved in Generation Z. One of the things that you see a little bit less of with Generation Z, and it appears that the pendulum is swinging back, is they're a little bit less of an optimistic group. They're a little bit more angsty, if that's a way to put it, because they seem to be, perhaps because of social media, perhaps because of the onslaught of information, it's not really clear, but they live in this comparison mode with others, and that can actually have a bit of a detrimental impact on their impression of self-worth and happiness. Because they seem to be more than the millennials living in this society that is overly impacted by those around them. And that's thought to potentially make them a less optimistic group. I don't know. People are still writing about it because, most of those individuals are not in the workforce yet, so it's hard to know how that plays out. But, that's what's being written about them now, that they're a little bit of an angstier group. Stay tuned. Maybe if you guys invite me back in 5 years, I'll be able to talk about Generation Z a little bit more. Interestingly, the last point I'll say about that is that there was a scale, like a happiness scale, that was essentially a ratio of perception and reality, right? So people who were the most happy had a perception of hard work that was either equal to their reality or worse than their reality. So if they thought it was going to be hard and it was hard, they were still moderately happy. If they thought it was going to be hard and it was easy, then their happiness went up. But as you can imagine, the converse is true. So if your perception score is that it's going to be really easy and it's really hard, then you are not only not happy, you're down really in the dumps about that. So again, thinking that all of this exposure to what everybody else puts forward as being easy and beautiful and seamless and everybody's got it together gives this perception that whatever you're doing, if you have to work hard for it, well, the other guy didn't have to work hard. Well, all you saw is what they put on Facebook, but it didn't look hard, and so that's thought to lead to this less happiness because their perception is not always aligned with their reality. Well, I think the difference is that with previous generations, it wasn't in their face 24/7, 365. So I don't think it's really that different. I think the difference, though, is it didn't always look easy before. So you might have had a better sense of what their reality was, as opposed to seeing the carefully cultivated image that's put forward on social media. Yes? I think a lot of it has to do, again, with perception, because it wasn't that long ago that you would be shamed in your department if you wanted to, for example, take 6 weeks off to have a baby. I'll just use that as an example. I mean, you would be shamed for it, for wanting, God forbid, to spend that much time away from the operating room and from your patients. You know, that's crazy. I mean, it's you know, it doesn't make any sense for someone to literally like deliver a baby and be back, you know, operating 10 days later. But it happened. I mean, it happened all the time. You know, because as recently as when I was a resident, and I'm not that old, you actually couldn't have 2 children in your 5 years of surgery residency, spend 6 weeks out with each, and still sit for your boards on time. You hadn't completed enough weeks. And I mean, that changed during my residency. So we're not talking about ancient times here. So what that led to was people, you know, having babies and being back in the operating room in no time flat. And so the other alternative was to postpone your childbearing until you were finished with training. Well, you know, you might be 35 before you finish with your training. And so to begin to start, you know, planning your family then, or to believe that somehow you're a better surgeon because you've done that, was really quite the prevailing theory. And so it was no wonder that there were people who said, you know, that's really not for me. You know, now, you know, there are men who will ask for paternity leave and be shamed for that, you know, that they should want to go and spend a day or a week, 2 weeks, whatever, with their, you know, newborn at home. So I think that the change has to acknowledge, again, it's a different worldview, right? I mean, no one's shaming the people who weren't there for the birth of their children. So why are you going to shame the ones who want to be there for the birth of their children? You know, like that's one example. I think the opportunity to be more flexible is really something that is being sought. Again, it wasn't that long ago when the notion that there was any part of surgery that would be shift work. And when I say shift work, I'm not talking about resident work hour shift work. I'm talking about, you know, beeper on, beeper off, the acute care surgery model, that there should be a team caring for the patients. Anathema. Oh my God, that's my patient, and I need to operate on them. You know, and I train like that, so I'm pitching it because I can see both sides. As someone who's got, you know, one leg firmly in each camp, as someone who trained before there was any work hour restrictions, you know, I can find myself falling into the good old days conversation about, you know, we were in the hospital all the time and every other night and and I loved it, and I learned how to operate, and I did love it. Way to learn surgery. Now, I happen to personally think the pendulum has swung too far, but you know, we can talk about the first trial and have a conversation about that, because I do think the pendulum has swung too far. On the other hand, the fact that I used to sit in the hospital and make, as a chief, my entire team sit in the hospital all day until my attending finished playing golf and came in around at 3 in the afternoon, and we would all sit there and wait, because that was what you did. Everybody on the team rounded with the attending whenever they got ready to come in. And if that was 3:30 on a Saturday afternoon, you all sat there till he came in, and that's when you rounded. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, it shouldn't be that way. Those were wasted hours that, you know, people could have spent doing other things. But not so long ago, it was absolutely outrageous and an affront to the attending to not have the entire team lined up whenever he got ready to come in and round. So, I mean, I think that just acknowledging that there is perhaps another way to look at these things, and perhaps we're not creating, you know, a generation of lazy folks by not making them sit in the hospital till 3:30 on a Saturday afternoon. You know, when we would have our conference also on the weekends, so that was the easiest time because there were no ORs. So, you know, we had conference at 7 a.m. Saturday morning, I guess. So, you know, you can imagine someone who was, you know, on call Saturday, you know, in there all day and rounding at 3 p.m. on the Sunday, because that's when the attending rounded, the people that worked all day Friday and then had to stay for conference and stay for rounds. I mean, there's ways to do it that are more efficient and more effective and help to address the work-life balance things that we know are coming forward, because smart young people, they're opting not to even go into medicine sometimes. You know, and that can be a financial conversation. We can have a whole conversation about that. But, you know, smart people who might have gone into medicine before are someone who's making other choices. If we're going to continue to recruit the best and the brightest, we've got to figure out what their issues are, and within the constraints necessary to provide great care to surgery patients, exemplary care, which is always our highest priority, we've got to at least consider that there might be a way to provide some flexibility. Yes? choosing primary care in many cases. Part of that has to do with the fact that our agenda on Capitol Hill has been hijacked in some ways by a conversation that would suggest that all we really need in this country are more primary care physicians. And so I'm not besmirching primary care. We need our primary care colleagues. But the fact is that if you get hit by a truck, you need a surgeon. If you've got cancer and you need surgery, you need a surgeon. But the conversation has been very successfully shaped so that it seems that the only needs are for our primary care colleagues. So any new money, and there's not much new money, but any new money is shunted in that regard. And even our attempts, from the college's standpoint, I try not to talk too much about the college because that's not what I'm here for, but even our attempts at the college to try to get, for example, loan repayment programs and carve-outs for the underserved areas, so that if you're a surgeon and you agree to practice in those areas, we can do some loan repayment and that kind of thing, have fallen short because all of that money is perceived to be set aside for the greatest need, which is primary care. So our argument continues to be, if you're a general surgeon, that is primary care. You need a medicine person and a surgery person. You can take care of an entire community, essentially, with those two individuals. And we were able to get a little bit of a carve-out for pediatric surgeons under the pediatrics, which is primary care carve-out. But we've been pretty unsuccessful in terms of loan repayment, which, again, to your point, would help the problem, because there's medical students coming out with $200,000, $225,000 worth of debt. So if you could do loan repayment, then again, that might assuage some of the worries of those individuals who would love to do surgery but simply can't afford to, because they already owe, a mortgage on their student loans before they ever get a real job. So, I think there's still work to be done on creative ways to try to get people to go back to those communities. One of the initiatives of the rural surgeons is, for example, to expose individuals to rural surgery. So many people don't know what rural surgery is. I mean, they think they're like, out with like a Bowie knife between their teeth, in the outback, fighting with a bear. Like, they don't even know what that is. So if you expose them to it, they may say, this is exactly what I wanted. It just wasn't something that was, to which I was exposed during my residency. So if we could do rotations, with institutions that have rural surgery rotations or tracks, then that may, again, expose a new generation of people who say, that's exactly where I want to be. I just didn't even know that existed as an option. So we're working on that on multiple fronts, but it's a challenge. As you saw, there wasn't a lot of change, unfortunately, even though we've identified this as a problem. All right, thank you.